where President George H.W. Bush will soon lie in state in the U.S. Capitol. Flags at federal buildings in Washington and across the country will fly at half-staff for 30 days. Our last farewell to a president happened 12 years ago after Gerald Ford died.
One of the planes used as Air Force One arrived in Houston yesterday. It will be renamed Special Air Mission 41 when it flies Mr. Bush to Washington this afternoon. The president's service dog, Sully, said goodbye last night. A Bush family spokesman tweeted this photo with the caption, "Mission complete." Bianna Golodryga is leading our coverage from Houston. She's outside St. Martin's Episcopal Church, where Mr. Bush worshiped in his final years. Bianna, good morning.
John and Norah, good morning to you. It's a sad day for the country, especially sad for the city of Houston, which lost two of its most famous residents, all within just a matter of a few months. The late president will be flown to Washington in just a few hours from here in Houston. Yesterday, I spoke with a man who's been a spiritual guide in Mr. Bush's life for the last decade. He was there for the final moments of both President and Mrs. Bush. He told me the president's final moments were like something anyone would want, surrounded by loving family and friends and ready to leave this world for the next.
I see history as a book with many pages.
Today, another page in the history book turns.
And each day, we fill a page with acts of hopefulness and meaning.
As the nation honors one of the country's most devoted public servants.
It's a loss not just for Houston, it's a loss to our nation, and it's a loss to the world.
Family pastor Dr. Russell Levinson Jr. was with President Bush at the very end.
You were fortunate enough to be there for not only Barbara's passing, but also the president's. Can you talk about that moment Friday night?
It was, as it was with Barbara, a comfortable, dignified, graceful, and in many ways, wonderful moment.
This is America.
He built a life around the theme of his most famous speech.
A brilliant diversity, spread like stars, like 1,000 points of light in a broad and peaceful sky.
And shown as a young Navy pilot in World War II, serving decades in government, from CIA director to vice president to the nation's highest office.
So help me God.
Less than a year into his term, the Berlin Wall fell. And a decisive victory for the U.S. military in the Gulf War led to high approval ratings. But he was criticized for not removing Saddam Hussein from power, while some point to a broken campaign promise.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
As one of the reasons he was a one-term president.
And this man whom I'd always liked and respected and then run against in a painful campaign in some ways, I literally came to love.
Putting his love of the country ahead of politics as a former President George H.W. Bush reached across the aisle.
His humility and his decency reflects the very best of the American spirit.
Even offering comfort while he himself was ill to former Vice President Joe Biden, whose son Beau was in a Houston hospital.
He said, I just came to welcome you to Houston and to tell you how badly I feel about Beau.
Because most of all, George Herbert Walker Bush cherished family.
After both Jeb and George were elected governor on the same day, I was flying home to Houston from Florida, and I said to Barbara, this is the happiest day in my life. And she said, what about the day we're married? I said, that was a nice day, too.
President and Mrs. Bush had an unshakable bond, even after her death.
He missed his Barbara. And I won't say he loved her, he loves her.
And in his last moments, close friend and former Secretary of State James Baker said the president spoke his final words in a phone conversation.
The very last words he spoke were spoken to George W. Bush, President Bush 43, who had told him how much he loved him and that he would see him on the other side. And 41 said, I love you too.
This is a family so full of love. Baker said the morning before the president died, he opened both of his eyes, looking at his Secretary of State, and asked, Jim, where are we going? Secretary Baker, who called President Bush Jefe, Spanish for chief, said, well, Jefe, we are going to heaven, to which the president replied, That's where I want to go. And Norah, in a conversation that I had with Reverend Levinson, he said a few months back he'd been speaking with President Bush about his passing and about the afterlife. And President Bush obviously wanting to be reunited with Barbara, also wanting to be reunited with the 3-year-old Robin, who died at the age of 3 from leukemia. And he asked Reverend, how old do you think she'll be? Reverend said, I don't know, but it'll be a beautiful moment. Norah.
I was so touched by that, Bianna. Thank you so much. And even hearing about James Baker and the final moments that he spent with his longtime friend. They had met on the tennis court many moons ago, and he had run all of Bush's campaigns, and talking about rubbing his hands and his feet in the final moments.
Yeah, to be there with your closest friend and your family around you. And remember, Barbara Bush, she had a sip of bourbon when she was going. That kind of love, a life lived this way, that is the reward, is to go that way, surrounded by family and friends.